The rival sent her to betray the rancher, but she changed sides before she even reached the gate. Delia had never thought of herself as the kind of person who could be bought. That was what made it so hard to admit, years later, that for a few desperate weeks in the middle of one of the hardest summers of her life, she almost was. She was 26 years old, living alone in a 2-room apartment on the edge of Colfax County, working part-time bookkeeping jobs wherever she could find them. The rent was 3 weeks overdue. Her car needed a new alternator. Her savings account had less than $90 in it. She was not a bad person. She was just tired and scared, in that very specific way that comes when the money runs out and the walls feel like they are closing in. That is when Gerald Putnam called her. Gerald was a land developer, the kind of man who wore expensive shoes in places where expensive shoes did not belong, and spoke in the smooth, careful tone of someone who had learned long ago that confidence is more persuasive than honesty. He had been working for nearly 2 years to acquire a piece of land on the south side of the county, a large cattle ranch called the Harlow property, and he needed it badly. His resort development plan depended on that bottomland. Without it, the whole project collapsed. The problem was Cole Harlow. Cole was 51 years old and had lived on that ranch his entire life. He had inherited it from his father, who had inherited it from his father before that. The land had been in the family for 3 generations, and Cole had no intention of selling it to anyone, for any price. Gerald had sent letters, made phone calls, sent intermediaries with polished proposals and generous offers. Cole had turned every single one of them down without much discussion, so Gerald tried something different. He came to Delia. He sat across from her at a small diner near the highway and explained what he needed in the kind of plain language that made it sound almost reasonable. He wanted her to approach Cole Harlow as a bookkeeping consultant. Nothing unusual, just a normal business introduction. Cole's ranch ran a small operation and could plausibly use outside accounting help. Once she was inside, once Cole trusted her enough to share his financial records or talk openly about his situation, she would look for anything useful. Old debts, late payments, a struggling season, any kind of weakness that Gerald could use as leverage to force a sale or negotiate from a position of strength. He slid a folded envelope across the table. Inside was more money than Delia had seen in one place in a long time. There was more where that came from, he said, if she did the job well. She told herself it was not really that bad. She was not stealing anything. She was not hurting anyone physically. She was just asking a few questions and passing along information. People did worse things every day for less money. She needed that rent paid. She needed that car fixed. She said yes. For the next few days, Delia prepared herself the way someone prepares for a role they are not sure they can play. Gerald gave her a folder with background information on the ranch, on Cole's history, on the failed business arrangements he had been involved in over the years. She studied it all, trying to find the version of herself that could walk onto that man's land and look him in the eye, while planning to use whatever she learned against him. The more she read, the harder that became. Cole Harlow, according to everything in that folder, was not a complicated man. He ran his ranch honestly. He paid his workers on time, always. 4 local families depended on wages from the Harlow property. He had turned down Gerald's offers, not because he was being stubborn or difficult, but because he genuinely believed that the land was not his to sell, that it belonged, in some important way, to the people who would come after him. He had said as much in a county land meeting several years earlier. The quote was right there in Gerald's research file, included presumably so Delia could find an angle to use against it. She read that quote 3 times. On a Tuesday morning in late July, she drove out toward the ranch. It was one of those mornings where everything looks beautiful, in a way that feels a little cruel. The sky completely clear, the fields green from recent rain, the road cutting straight through country that smelled like cedar and warm earth. Delia had her folder on the passenger seat, and her prepared introduction rehearsed in her head. The gate was about a quarter mile down a dirt road off the main highway. She turned onto it and drove slowly, the red dust rising behind her tires. And then, without fully deciding to, she stopped. She did not stop because something blocked the road. She did not stop because she got a phone call or remembered something. She stopped because her foot came off the gas and onto the brake, and the car rolled to a quiet halt about 200 yards from the gate, and she just sat there. She could see the gate from where she was parked. It was a simple wooden gate, Nothing fancy, with a metal latch and a handmade sign that said Harlow Ranch in faded painted letters. Beyond it, she could make out the shapes of the barn and the main house in the distance. She sat in that car for 11 minutes. She watched the clock on her dashboard because it was something to look at. The numbers changed. She did not move. She thought about her own father. He had been a small farmer, the kind of man who knew every inch of his land by feel, who could tell you which corner of the backfield drained slow after rain, and which fence post had been there since before she was born. When she was 9 years old, a creditor took that farm. She still remembered the morning the notice came, the way her father sat at the kitchen table and did not say anything for a very long time. She had not understood it fully then. She understood it now. She thought about the 4 families who worked the Harlow property and what would happen to their livelihoods if Gerald got what he wanted and turned the bottomland into a resort development. She thought about Cole Harlow standing at a county meeting and saying that the land was not his to sell. And she thought about herself. Not the version of herself that had said yes in that diner, but the version she had been before things got hard. The one who had always believed that the way you behave when nobody is watching says more about you than anything else. She put the car in reverse. She backed down the dirt road without turning around, pulled onto the highway, and drove in the opposite direction. Not home. To the county seat, 40 minutes away, where a lawyer named Priscilla Odom had a small office on the second floor of a building near the courthouse. Priscilla was a woman Delia had met years earlier through a mutual friend, a quiet and serious attorney who had once told her, half joking, that if she ever found herself tangled up in something she should not be tangled up in, to come see her before it got worse. Delia had laughed at that. She was not laughing now. She sat in Priscilla's office and told her everything. The diner meeting, the envelope of money, the folder, the drive out, the 11 minutes sitting on the dirt road 200 yards from the gate. She laid it all out, without trying to make herself sound better than she had been. Priscilla listened to the whole thing. When Delia finished, the lawyer was quiet for a moment, and then said something simple, that Delia had driven to a road and stopped, and that meant she still had a choice. With Delia's full consent and cooperation, Priscilla contacted Cole Harlow directly. She told him what had been planned, who had planned it, and what role Delia had been hired to play. She also told him that Delia had turned around before reaching the gate and had come forward voluntarily. 2 days later, Cole Harlow called Delia himself. His voice on the phone was not warm exactly, but it was not cold either. He asked if she would be willing to come out to the ranch and speak with him in person. She almost said no. She was afraid of what she would find when she got there. Anger, or the kind of deep weariness that comes from being let down by people one too many times. She went anyway. When she turned down that dirt road for the second time, the sky was overcast, the dust less visible in the gray light. She drove all the way to the gate this time. Cole Harlow was standing beside it when she arrived, holding 2 cups of coffee, one in each hand. He handed her one without saying anything at first. They stood there for a moment, and then he said he wanted to hear it from her directly, in her own words. So she told him. From the beginning. She did not skip the part where she said yes, or the part where she studied his background looking for weaknesses, or the part where she sat in her car on his road for 11 minutes, unable to make herself keep going. She told him all of it. He listened without interrupting. When she was done, he looked out at the field for a moment and then said quietly that what stayed with him was the part about the gate, that she had driven all the way out there and turned around before she even reached it. She said yes, that was what happened. He nodded and said he thought that mattered. Gerald Putnam, once formally informed by Cole's attorney that his scheme had been fully documented and disclosed, withdrew his development application for the Harlow bottomland. He relocated his business operations to a different county within the year. No criminal charges were ultimately filed, but the documentation remained on record, and Gerald's ability to operate quietly in Colfax County was finished. Delia lost the money she had been promised. She went back to picking up small accounting jobs wherever she could find them, slowly rebuilding her client list. It was not easy. The rent got paid eventually. The car got fixed eventually. She did not let herself think too much about the envelope Gerald had slid across that diner table, because when she did, she felt the pull of it still, and she did not like that feeling. 6 months after the day at the gate, Cole Harlow called her again. He needed a bookkeeper, a real one this time, he said, and she would hear the slight dry humor in his voice if she was paying attention. His previous one had retired, and the ranch accounts had gotten messy. She took the job. For the next 3 years, Delia drove down that same red dirt road every weekday morning. She passed the spot where she had stopped and sat for 11 minutes. She never pulled over there again. The Harlow Ranch still stands. The bottomland is still what it has always been. Open country, cattle moving slowly through the morning light, fence lines running straight to the horizon. The 4 families who worked there kept working there. The land stayed in the hands of the man who believed it was not his alone to decide. Delia, in a short interview she gave to a local county paper some years later, said she did not think of herself as someone who had done something brave. She said she had just been a person sitting in a car on a dirt road, trying to figure out who she actually was when things got hard. She said the road gave her 11 minutes to figure it out. That turned out to be just enough.